This was a very strange encounter. It was very scary at the time, but when I tell people the story, they usually don't think it was something to freak out about. Last Thanksgiving, I was driving home from college with a friend, both 21 and female at the time. I live in a very isolated part of Arkansas that requires driving through an hour of hairpin turns in the mountains. There's a lot of blind turns, and the whole time you're driving on the edge of huge drop-offs with no barriers. I'm usually pretty confident driving through the mountains, but we were in my friend's car, so I was going slower than usual, driving over 5 over the speed limit. Almost as soon as we started getting to the roughest part of the drive, another car was tailgating us pretty close. This was stressing me out, and as soon as I saw where I could pull over, I did. I pulled into a church parking lot, and my friend offered to drive the rest of the way, but I declined as it was completely dark and she'd never driven this route before. We get back on our way, and a few minutes later, I have to come to a screeching halt as there's a car stops in the middle of the road. It wasn't on the shoulder at all, just stopped dead in the middle of the road. My friend is saying that they must have broken down, but can't call a tow because there's no service in this area. I immediately have a bad feeling and lock the doors. I tell my friend to stay in the car no matter what. She starts to get scared at this point and points out that she thinks it was the car that was following us. I can't tell, but I'm extremely scared at this point. It's parked right before a hairpin turn, so I can't pass it. My friend starts frantically telling me to go ahead and pass it, but I don't want to get hit by a Mack truck or fall off a mountain. I honk my horn. Nothing happens. No chance for calling for help as there's no cell service. We wait there for a while doing nothing. My friend's crying and freaking out, but I'm too scared to try and pass them. I honk a couple of times, and eventually a guy gets out of the car, comes around the back and leans against my car, just staring at us. My friend is freaking out even more, and I'm just frozen. I tell her not to make eye contact. I'm ready to floor it if he does something, but he just stands there staring. He's not checking his car or anything. I try and calm down and pray that another car will come along soon. This goes on for what seems like forever, but was probably only about 15 minutes. He's just casually leaning against his car looking at us. Eventually, we see car lights in our rear view, and then the guy jogs to his car door and gets back in his car. He speeds off, going dangerously fast. There was nothing wrong with his car. I start driving, not wanting to cause a wreck. We don't see anything else for a while, but we pass the same car parked on the highway a while later, and it pulls back on and starts tailing us again. I try to speed up and get rid of him, but he keeps following. We have a cell service at this point, but don't know if we should call the cops because nothing's really happened. I call home and tell my brothers what's going on and tell them to wait on the porch for us. The car follows me all the way home down the really long drive to my house. I get to my house and my 2 brothers are waiting on the porch holding their deer rifles. I pull in and the car just goes in the end of the drive, loops around and speeds back off the way it came. We tried to see its plates, but we couldn't make them out. Me and my friend were really freaked out, but when I told my other friends the whole story, they didn't really think it was a big deal. I was one of those kids you see walking around zoos or amusement parks wearing a leash. Those were already a thing 20 plus years ago, but less common, and were initially only tied around the wrists. In my case it was a necessity. I would always start wandering off from the rest of the family no matter what the situation. This is one of those stories that led me to earning my leash. It happened when I was about 6 years old, and I went to the zoo with my mum and sisters. Before every family outing, my mum made sure to give me the talk about not walking off again or face the consequences. My mum was a strict parent that made her good on the promises. She had to, being a single mother of 3. I didn't try and disobey her, per se, but I often just didn't pay attention to the world and people around me. No different this day. I behaved and followed the group for a while, but then a butterfly garden caught my attention, and off I was. When I finally realised I separated myself from my mum and sisters again, I panicked and started walking around the zoo looking for them, being afraid of my mum's reaction more than anything else. After a while, I somehow got it in my head that if I could just walk out, find a car, and wait there, my family would eventually find me. I got lost within a couple of minutes, walking around a strange neighbourhood looking for either our car or the way back to the zoo. Nothing looked familiar. I started crying. Mum was going to be so mad. This man came up to me, just normal looking, about 40 years old, asking me if I'm lost. I explained to him that I lost my family when we were visiting the zoo, and I'm looking for the way back. I couldn't believe my luck when the man told me he had just come from the zoo and saw my family there, standing near the entrance, who were waiting for this little girl with blonde hair and a baseball cap. But it was still a few blocks away, so he proposed that I walk with him to his car, and we could drive the rest of the way back. Just the mention of his car made me hesitant. I told him that I wasn't allowed to get in a car with strangers, and my mum would be so mad. He then said something like, that was true, but I looked smart enough to know if I could trust someone. I don't remember the exact words, but something like it. Also, he added that he spoke to my parents earlier when they were looking for me, so he's not a complete stranger. That didn't seem right. I asked him if he really talked to my dad, who had died a year before, and when he said that he did, I broke down crying uncontrollably. I still didn't understand the situation I was in. I was really confused about everything and scared of how angry my mum was going to be after all this. Finally, my crying caught the attention of a security guard of a parking lot building where we were standing next to, asking if there was something he could help with. The guy stepped aside with the security guard and explained the situation, but made it vaguely sound like he was my father and we were looking for his wife. The security guard seemed to believe in, pointing us in the right direction towards the zoo. The man thanked the security guard and proceeded to take my hand and walk away. The security guard takes one last look at me and asks me, in a comfortingly friendly adult-to-child kind of way, while I'm still crying. I tell him that my dad's dead. He looks really confused for a few seconds, and after this man is not my dad. I tell him again, no, this isn't my dad. In a split second, his whole face and posture changes, and he turns to look at the guy, who's trying to explain he never actually said he was my dad, and that the security guard must have misunderstood, and that he was just helping me find my mum. The security guard said he appreciated the man's help, but he would take me off his hands now, and the guy immediately took off. I don't really think there was much else the security guard could have done. I explained the whole situation, and after making a phone call, he walked me to the entrance to the zoo, which was just around the corner from the parking building, to where we were brought to the security office, where my mum and sisters were already waiting. I feel extremely lucky for the security guard being in the right place at the right time that day, and very grateful for the extra second of time that he took that could have made all the difference. This encounter was not too long ago, and solidified in my mind while I will always close the blinds at night, and why, even in a quiet suburban neighbourhood, you should always lock your door. I have been reading creepy stories online since I was about 12, when I first discovered Tumblr and Reddit, Creepypasta, Sixpence, No Sleep, and of course, Let's Not Me. So I have long since taken to checking all the windows and locks before I go to bed, and closing blinds and curtains for fear that I might look out to see some creep in a clown costume with a knife in my garden. I sort of always wished I had a creepy encounter so I could write about it, but if I never had another experience like this for the rest of my life, it will be too soon. So context. This nice suburban neighbourhood, as I say, is the home of my parents. A little town in Cheshire, England, quiet street where everyone knows each other. Low crime rate, except for one house which has been heavily burgled twice in about 10 years, both opportunistic. Once because the keys were near the door, and the invader smashed a small plane to reach them. Anyway, I don't live with my parents anymore, but I was back in town and stayed with them for a few days over summer. I was sat in the kitchen, which faces onto the street, and working on my laptop, just glancing up occasionally to watch people pass by walking dogs or strolling with a pram. I had seen something moving in my peripheral, so like every time, I looked up hoping to see a dog walker, or one neighbour, or a newborn grandson. Nope. Two people, a man in a semi-casual suit, and a woman in plain jeans and a blouse. They were both moving weirdly. The woman had her head craned over to one of her shoulders, and her arm on the other side bent backwards and unnaturally upwards, with her hand rhythmically flicking. Her other arm randomly but smoothly glided about, guided by her elbow. It was a bit like when you try and push two magnets together at the same point of polarity. That's how I would describe it. I have friends with epilepsy, and I've never seen them contort or flick like that, not even in their melancholic jerks. The man looked like more of one of those dancing inflatables you see at a used car dealership, and that's the only way I could describe his movements. They walked past my parents' house, and I instinctively called out to my cat, check he wasn't outside with those weirdos. I found him upstairs in my room. He was looking out the window, and as I follow his gaze, I see two of the kid neighbours in the double burgled house waving across to me, well, to my cat, but I waved back at the same time from their parents' upstairs window. I went downstairs to tell my parents about the strange moving people, and my dad just furrowed his brow, asked if they were gone, and said to double check that the door was locked. I headed back to the kitchen to check our back door was locked. This door doesn't have any windows, so you can understand that I jumped out my skin when, as I put my hand on the door handle, it was pushed down from someone on the other side. I pushed on the door immediately, before anyone can push it from the outside. I also must have screamed because I hear my dad call back. I hear his footsteps coming through the house. Then I hear a loud gasp on the other side of the door, and out of the kitchen window, guess who I see making a retreat? The creepy moving dude and dudette. By this time my dad's made it through the house and they're gone. He doesn't seem to believe me, although he doesn't seem to be doubting me either. He's never seen them before, and takes a free pop at me for being so discriminatory against potential house guests with moving disorders. I don't sleep well, due to that movement disorder actually, and those scary stories I read meant that I always listened to the excessive creaking in the house, and the noises on the street at night, like people walking home drunk and foxes mating. Most of the sounds are quiet though, so imagine my shock when my straining ears are suddenly attacked by a child's scream. It takes me a second to locate the sound, and another to lurch from my bed to the window, looking straight over to the window upstairs, the same one where, not 12 hours ago, my neighbour's children were waving to me from. I scanned down to the house and saw their front door wide open. I shouted to my parents, hoping to wake them up as I flew down the stairs in my PJs, with 999 already dialed on my phone to report the likely home invasion before I do anything else. I'm remembering to scream fire, not burglar, as I stride across the road, attempting to wake another neighbour and gather as much support as I can. There are 2 kids and a teenager in a commonly burgled house, kids who are babysat for 10 years, and one of them just screamed at 2 AM when their front door is wide open. I make sure I say out loud to get the emergency responder on the phone. As I near the house, I see a figure inside moving frantically. So after telling the phone responder what's happening and answering their brief questions, I shout into the door from a safe distance some phrases the police gave me to say. The police are on their way, and is anyone hurt? I try to tell the intruders, we know you're there, please don't hurt anyone, the police can help you. I get a response from the upstairs window, and step back into the road to see another mother holding all 3 kids in her arms, and she tells me the middle child, who's 9, found intruders on the stairs when she went to get a drink in the night. The girl Imogen tells me they're like clowns. Clowns? This extra detail is a straw that broke the camel's back, and my vision darkens. Oh god, I'm gonna pass out, I think. The last thing I hear is Immy telling her mum I said a bad word. I came to in the middle of the road with a full blanket on and soft Octonaut toy under my head. I could see a lot of blue lights, 3 police cars and an ambulance, that one's for me, and I can see my neighbours out of the corner of my eye. My hearing returns as Amy tells me a little brother volunteered his toy because I hit my head as I fainted. Suddenly, I'm up and I'm looking around to count all 5 of the family members and checking for injury. Over the top of their heads, I can see an arm frantically waving out of view. Yep, moving weirdos broken into my neighbour's house. I see the woman is standing still, her head is still slumped to the side, just as she's lowered into the police car. I was told later, as I spoke to my neighbours out their bedroom window, that they had gone to fight the intruders and kick the woman down the stairs as she was climbing them. The man was the frantically moving shadow that I'd seen from the doorway. Police reckon they'd been trying the doors all down our street and found one unlocked. I told them about the couple trying our door earlier in the afternoon. I'm guided to the ambulance and sat on the bed whilst the paramedics tend to a large cut on the back of my head from my fall. I vaguely feel them removing the gravel, cleaning and gluing it and dressing it. But I'm preoccupied, trying to watch two police contain the human dancing inflatable man. They can't catch both arms at the same time to cuff him, so eventually one of the policemen is cuffed to one of the man's hands, and thus has his arm flung every which way as the man continues to move. I have no idea what they've been tried with, if they were on drugs or had a movement disorder. Me and my dad do have a small bet on this matter, or when the court hearing is yet, but as a key witness, I'll be told when they need me in court. But I would happily go the rest of my life without hearing a kid scream at 2 AM and seeing those weird moving creeps.
Before I share this story, I want to share the fact that this is my first Reddit post ever. It's a story I've only shared with 2 other people in my life, who I'm very close to, because I sound batshit crazy trying to explain what happened to me. I'm from Roswell, New Mexico, born and raised. I grew up dealing with bullshit alien nonsense my entire life. The whole town is a tourist attraction for people who believe in aliens, and believe there actually was a UFO that crashed here in the early 50s. Gift shops, cheap souvenirs, and strange people galore. I'm a very logical thinker, and have had many strange things happen to me in the past, but have always dealt with them in a "this can logically be explained" mindset since I can remember. But what I'm about to write about is something I cannot explain, and it is also something I'm hesitant to even think about anymore. I was camping with my cousin Cam, who was 17 at the time, the same age I was, and his little brother Nick, who was 12, and my aunt and uncle. We were near Cloudcroft, New Mexico, up in the mountains. My uncle had just bought a new camper, and we decided to go camping with it for the weekend. The weather was beautiful, and me and my cousins decided to bring a tent to sleep in instead of the camper, so we could be shitheads in peace. We set up our tent about 60 yards away from the camper, and the fire that was right outside of it. Toward the end of the first night, and after a long day of exploring, we all decided to lay down for the night. We were not camping on an actual campsite. It was a spot my uncle had found some years back, and it was the perfect spot to set up camp. At about 3 AM, the fire was completely out. My cousins and I were still awake. Nick, being the youngest, was trying to stay up to be cool, but ended up falling asleep. It was only Cam and I awake now. We were just shooting the shit, talking about hot chicks from school, and brilliant ideas for things that needed to be invented, like male birth control, and eventually slowly started to fall asleep too. All of a sudden, we hear a blood-curdling scream from the distance, probably the same distance away the camper was, only in the opposite direction. Me and Cam both picked our heads up off the pillow and said almost simultaneously, "What the fuck was that?" It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a fox, it was big. The closest way I know to describe it is a mixture between a banshee and a rabid peacock. Its voice was deep and echoed through the woods. It let out another blood-curdling shriek, and we both sat upright on our blow-up mattresses. Immediately after the screech, it started clicking. An odd, deep clicking sound that sounded like it came from the back of his throat. It was loud enough to hear from a distance. We were scared, and neither of us had any idea what it could be. We waited a second, both quiet as a mouse. It let out another scream, followed by a series of clicks, but it seemed to be closer now. Maybe 10 yards closer. I looked at Cam, and he looked just as shocked as I was feeling. I was trying to convince myself that it was a bird of some sort, or a mountain cat. Then I heard it walking. It was walking on 2 feet. I could distinctly hear it. It even sounded big, taking huge strides, cracking branches and leaves under its feet as it walked. It sounded like it was coming closer to us. It screeched and clicked loudly again. I could tell it was about halfway to us now. Suddenly, another scream and clicks came from another direction, sounding just as close as the other creature. It sounded more aggressive though, more angry and dominant. The first creature then let off a series of clicks too. Then it hit me. They were communicating. At this point, I was terrified, and so was Cam. I had an axe under my blow-up mattress, but I was afraid to get up and grab it. Then, both of the creatures started walking towards us, both on two legs, not screaming or clicking. It sounded like they were trying to be sneaky, like trying to sneak up on our tent. They were getting closer and closer. The first one screamed loudly. I could tell it was roughly 15 yards away now, and so was the other creature. It screamed. After screaming, it started clicking again, and the other one clicked back at it. They were both walking closer and closer to the tent. I could hear them both stepping on limbs and leaves, but I could feel the ground thud with each step they took. I was panicking, frantically looking for my axe, while Cam was trying to wake up his little brother. I couldn't find my axe anywhere. I suddenly realized that I had left it near the campfire because we were using it to cut pieces of wood for the fire. Nick was not waking up, and they were getting closer and closer to the tent. Eventually, me and Cam froze. The second one had stopped about 10 feet away from the tent, but the first one was walking right up to it. As soon as it was right outside the tent, I yelled as loud as I could, out of pure fear, "Get the fuck away from here! Leave us alone!" It stopped. It was right outside. I could almost see it through the tent. It was huge, tall enough to lean over and look through the top of the tent if it wanted to. I could tell it was slim, and the creature was heavy because of how tall it was. I could feel its energy, and it was very negative. I felt the vibes of the universe, and they were telling me that whatever these things were, they were not there to just say hi, or to steal our fucking hot dogs. I was frozen. They were right outside, and the moon was covered by clouds, so moonlight was no longer shining anywhere. I couldn't even hear it breathing. It was silent. The second one clicked from behind us, still about 10 feet away from the tent. The first one didn't move. It didn't make a single sound. It was probably a foot away from the tent. My heart was beating so hard that I thought I was going to pass out. All of a sudden, it took 2 steps back, and the second one let out a scream so loud that it hurt my ears. I immediately burst into tears. The second creature took off into the woods, pounding the ground underneath it, running on its 2 legs faster than Usain Bolt himself. The first one apparently turned around and walked away back into the woods. I waited until I completely heard its footsteps disappear. Then I unzipped the tent, threw Nick over my shoulder, and we booked it toward the camper. We got inside and woke up my aunt and uncle. They had no idea what was going on and urged us to take our asses to bed. We slept in the camper for the next 2 nights, and I didn't leave the campsite for the rest of the trip. I don't know what we encountered that night, but all I know is it was not of this kind. It was not human, not a bear, nor any 4-legged animal I've ever seen, and it was definitely not a rabid peacock. It has scarred me ever since, and its energy and screams still haunt me to this day. This event happened 3 years ago, during mid-July. I lived in Montana, outside of a rural community with a population of about 2,000. During this time, I lived in a small, 1-floor ranch home by myself. My nearest neighbor lived 1 mile away and was a farmer. I never had many strange encounters leading up to this one, but the woods by my house always had an ominous feel to it. Soon after moving in, I realized why the previous homeowners left so quickly. I'd start to hear noises in the woods. These weren't just any noises, but what sounded like blood-curdling screams and growls. After some research, I learned that even something like a raccoon or a bobcat can make these unnatural noises, and chalked it up to being that. But still, it just never felt right. It's hard to explain, but I never felt like this before, and it was just something about the woods around my house that made me uncomfortable. like I was always being watched. The first experience that I couldn't explain happened about 2 weeks after I moved in. There was a thunderstorm, and the thunder was loud enough to keep me awake. I never did feel comfortable in storms by myself. The lightning was crazy and would light up the whole surrounding area for a fraction of a second. I was laying on the couch and got up to get a drink. It was about 2 a.m. if I recall correctly. Above the sink, there's a small window that gives a view of my yard leading up to the tree line. When the next flash of lightning hit, I saw it. Admittedly, it wasn't a long view, but it gave me enough time to see whatever this thing was. It was near the tree line, just a few steps into my yard. At first, I thought it was a bear, but it wasn't. It was standing on 2 legs with its face pointed toward the house. Its legs were like a dog's, and I could clearly make out the hocks. It was hard to tell the color of the fur, but it was dark. Its upper body was massive, with a wide torso and arms that could almost reach the ground from standing. The strangest thing is how the upper body seemed to dwarf the lower body. After standing there, frozen in shock, I waited for the next lightning strike, but when it happened, it wasn't there. It happened so quickly and was gone so quickly. After that, I bought a gun and would sleep with it within an arm's reach. The next encounter is what I consider the most frightening thing that's ever happened in my life. For several weeks, nothing worth noting happened. I don't get cable where I live, and one night, I was watching something and my satellite kept acting up. I didn't like going outside at night, but this would be quick. I just had to move the antenna a little bit. Nothing had happened for a few weeks, so I decided to just go out and do it. I grabbed my gun and flashlight and went outside. The first thing I noticed was the eerie quietness that surrounded me. This time of year, at night, the woods are very active with all types of creatures, but not tonight. Despite the fear I was developing, I made my way over to the satellite and began to adjust it. I heard a small snap of a stick and quickly turned to my left and shined the light towards the direction of the noise. What I saw will horrify me for the rest of my life. I was immediately met with red eyes. These eyes were the same color of blood, and they were evil. The head of this thing looked like a mutated German Shepherd. I don't like to say it, but it looked like a werewolf. A long snout and pointed ears. The fur was black and shaggy in some places. I could see this creature's extremely developed frame, and it dwarfed even the biggest humans I'd ever seen. It was half in and half out of the woods, almost crouching, and it still came up to my head at 6 foot. Fully standing, this thing would have been at least 8 foot, I estimated. I was about 20 feet away. I didn't even consider my gun, which I thought would protect me. Chances are, in hindsight, the little .223 bullets would have just pissed this thing off before it tore me to shreds. I backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact with it. I gently picked up my gun, and my fight-or-flight reflexes kicked in. I chose flight. Maybe not the best option, but even if I stayed there, this thing would have killed me. I ran the fastest I'd ever had in my life, and didn't turn back once. I had no idea if it was pursuing me or not. I got in the house, locked every door, window, covered the blinds, and sat with my back against the wall, cradling my gun the entire night. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night, and very few the following days. So, to make a long story short, I don't live there anymore. People often talk of Sasquatch being harmonious with nature and living within the ecosystem. Sure, if you see one it might be scary, but it's probably more awe than anything. With this thing, it was totally different. It felt unnatural. It was sinister. It felt evil. It was stalking me, toying with me, and I believe it would have killed me in an instant. I've never seen nor experienced this feeling again in my life. It's a memory I try to put past me, but I still get nightmares every now and then. I think until the day I die, I will always have that image burned into my memory. The best image I have seen that fits the description of the creature are the werewolves from the movie The Howling. I'll answer any questions you might have. I can only imagine many have seen and posted about it here already. I haven't searched the chat. When I was 7 years old, I lived in a small town in the mountains of British Columbia. Really small, like a few thousand at most. We were isolated. The house was huge, way too big for our 3-person family in fact. I had the bedroom upstairs, down the hall from my parents, and I always slept with the doors open out of fear. I hated being in closed rooms at night. One night, a literally dark and stormy night, no cliche for effect, I woke suddenly. I remember the rain pattering on the window above me, and the trees whooshing in the wind as they do. If I had to guess, it must have been somewhere between 1 and 3 a.m. I distinctly remember that feeling. You know how you wake up in the middle of the night and have at least a general sense for the time? My bed was right across from the last door in the hallway, like against the wall, with my head closest to a corner and my feet closest to the door. Like, if I pointed my toes, the door was there, about 6 feet away. If I woke up on my back, I'd be looking right at it if I just raised my head a bit. And that's exactly what happened that night. I saw it then. As soon as my eyes registered the space around me, in my doorway, the Hat Man. A motionless, black void, like a glitch in the Matrix. Like someone had just wiped all the physical space from the area it took up and left a black hole. But it wasn't shapeless. I saw a trench coat, tapering upwards as they do, and a rimmed hat on its head. It did make a noise and didn't move, and I mean not at all. It was absolutely devoid of depth, beyond the 2D shape of a large trench coat and rimmed hat wearing man, and motion and color and everything. It was pure blackness. It looked exactly like this, and I mean exactly. I felt pure dread overwhelm me, and I remember pulling the blankets over my head after about 2 or 3 seconds of seeing it. I remember screaming for my parents, who were down the hall. And that's the last thing I remember, until waking up the next morning, still in bed. I ran down the hallway immediately, woke my parents up and told them what I saw. They, in a just woke stupor, assured me it was a dream and that I shouldn't worry. But I know what I saw. Years later, probably somewhere between 17 and 20, being that I never forgot it in full detail and thought of it rather often, several times a year, every year, I decided to Google shadow person with hat or something close to it. I believe I saw the picture linked above first in images, or something very close, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. That was fucking it. That was what I saw. How the fuck was it online? They call it the Hat Man. Thousands of people have seen this thing all over the world. I read tons of the accounts. Some came off as delusion, some came off as fiction, but many, just like my experience. This was as validating as it was harrowing. It was fucking real. That thing was in my doorway when I was a child, and my memory had apparently been erased after I saw it, and hid under the blankets. A lot of good that would do, until the next morning waking up. What the fuck happened? I still have no idea what the fuck that thing was in my doorway, or what happened between pulling the blankets up in the morning. I guess I never will. I've never seen it again, but my life has been utterly disturbing time and time again, other than just this experience. This was the first of a long line of inexplicable, frightening bullshit that seems to never go away, in one way or another. am of Navajo descent. I am 1/4. My grandfather is pure. This was quite a while ago, but every summer, we used to go and stay at my uncle's house. He has 3 floors, and the basement was pretty much the living room and had a slope that went above ground, so it was only half underground, had windows and everything. So, for some odd reason, they leave these huge windows open at night. I've seen skinwalkers snooping around pretty often, mainly as distant silhouettes or 6-foot-tall coyotes, so I knew exactly what to expect when you voluntarily leave a window open that was large enough for a person to climb through. So, we were all getting ready for bed. My grandma was sleeping on one couch, my brother and his friends sleeping on another, and me and my aunt were sleeping on a mattress behind the couch that my grandma was on. Everyone else went camping outside. Around 1 a.m. or so, I woke up feeling uneasy. I sat up and looked around, and everything appeared normal, and I went back to sleep. So, at 4 a.m., I awoke again. I rolled on to my left side to see my aunt sleeping peacefully, despite having rolled off of our mattress. Her hair spread across the floor, and she was completely wrapped up, cozy in her blanket. Everything seemed normal, until I realized that my aunt was on the right side of the bed, and whatever I was looking at was not my aunt. The long black hair was not hers, and her knee was exposed, but wasn't a knee. It just looked like some joints, not human, more like an animal. I reached my arm up and grabbed the couch and flipped myself over to the other side. I woke my grandma up in doing so I told her to stay awake, but to stay quiet, and it began to move around the couch and back out of the window. It was so odd though. The way it moved was so smooth, kind of like Heartless from Kingdom Hearts. It was very snake-like. I've never forgot this experience. I've had sleep paralysis before. My older sister is trying to convince me that this was just sleep paralysis, but I have a deep feeling that it wasn't. To begin, I live in Colorado, just outside of Denver, in the metro area in a nicely populated neighborhood right off of a major highway. As a kid, I was convinced for some reason that I was an alien or some sort of alien experiment, and I genuinely have no idea where this thought came from. I'd assumed, of course, that it was just kid silliness. I'd probably watched Escape to Witch Mountain or E.T. too many times. Either way, I haven't thought about aliens in a long time, and I was starting to doubt that they actively visit our planet. Anyways, this happened. In the middle of dreaming, I woke up suddenly to a feeling of alertness and dread. This intense feeling of terror came over me, and I felt an immediate urge to run, scream, and cry. But I had a very strong feeling that I should stay still and not move at all. I was going to get out of the bed, but the instinct to not move was too strong to ignore, so I just stayed there. And then, there was a white square light hovering above me. It was about 3 feet in size, and made up of smaller lights arranged in a squared formation. There was this strange humming emanating from it, and I realized that I couldn't hear my fan or the cars on the highway like I usually can. The terror came full force at this realization, and I wanted so badly to run and scream, but the instinct that I needed to be quiet and stay there was too strong to ignore. I wanted so badly to get up, but it's like I knew that I shouldn't. Despite my terror, I didn't allow myself to cry. I just started quietly whispering, "I want to stay with my mom. I'm going to stay with my mom." And then the humming stopped. My fan started whirring again, and the light was gone. Immediately after, I felt very, very sleepy, and I could feel that I was starting to forget about what just happened. But I decided I wasn't going to let myself forget, and I went and turned the light on, and I started crying. My older sister ended up calling me and trying to convince me it was just my anxiety and I was having sleep paralysis, but this really didn't feel like it. I knew in my mind that I could move. I just had this feeling that I shouldn't move at all. I've had sleep paralysis before, and I know how to fight it and deal with it calmly. I feel crazy. I feel so crazy. But something happened to me, and thinking about it, I feel like this has happened before because I wanted to forget. And this time, I honestly wish I'd forgotten again. If anyone can relate to this experience, please tell me. I'm honest to God hoping this was just sleep paralysis, but I feel so strongly that it wasn't.